Hi everyone, and welcome back to SwitchUp and to 10 addictive games.
Yeah, we like to do these lists every so often. We've done a good few now, haven't we, over the years. We'll stick the last couple in the description as well, so you can see what else we've recommended. But these are games that we find addictive for whatever reason. They could be high score chasers or just games that we kind of lose ourselves in.
Exactly right. Make sure you save yourself a little bit of money, 5%, using code SwitchUp over at switchup.gg to buy your eShop credit or any pre-ordered games.
Lovely. So which games do we find addictive? Well, let's find out. Okay, my first game then is a game that came out a while ago now actually. It's a game called Butcher. Now this is a 2D action game, sprite based, has a very simplistic look to it, uses very small characters, but I quite feel that works to the game's charm. It almost reminds me of like Terminator 2 in some ways. You have these like dank environments and you just have to blast your way through. You've got chainsaws, shotguns, assault rifles to take the enemies out, and you just have to get from point A to point B, but there are like switches that you need to flip and elevators that you need to take to get to where you've got to be, constantly being attacked by enemies. There are parts where the environment will lock down and you need to take a certain amount, like a wave of enemies out. It's just a huge amount of fun, and it definitely has that addictive quality to it where you'll die and you want to get straight back in there and try again.
Next up then is the legendary Everspace. Now I haven't spoken about this in a long time. I've been secretly hoping they'd bring the sequel across, but doesn't seem like the developers are able to use the Switch hardware. I've actually spoken to them and they said it's not powerful enough, which is quite upsetting. But the first game is still more than viable. It's a space-based roguelite, which follows a lot of the similar characteristics of many roguelites, whereby you can choose a class, in this case a ship. You head out on your runs. There are multiple different routes that you can take through the solar system, and they have varying challenges. But what I really liked about this is how well it does the continuing story. So if you're on a story mission and you die halfway through your run, that will actually carry on, so the next time you see that character, it's assumed that you've already seen the first part of that narrative. It's nice, it's something we've seen in many other roguelites, but I think it's one of the defining characteristics of the great ones. Now the combat is really good, but unfortunately the controls are a little bit janky. I believe it's option number 3 that you want to choose, which is a bit random, but you'll know what I mean when you actually get to play the game. One of the right sticks I think uses the strafing mechanic, and then the other one can barrel roll, but without that it feels really odd and it's difficult to pull off some of the more advanced moves. Now the whole thing is skill based, which is always nice. You don't have to rely on getting really powerful ships and really powerful upgrades. But yeah, really enjoyed it. Not the longest, you can reach the end quite quickly, but a very good game. I think it looks beautiful and I'm a huge space nerd, so yeah, check that one out.
Okay, my next one is one I've mentioned before, but it's just a perfect game for this sort of list. It's Pang Adventures. Now, the game Pang has been out for a long time now on various consoles and home computers over the years, and the basic premise is that you have almost like a harpoon gun, I guess, and there are balloons on the screen, and every time you pop one, it will turn into 2 smaller ones, which in turn 2 smaller ones again, and you have to keep popping them until there are none left. Obviously, it's never as easy as it sounds, and there are so many on screen that avoiding them, especially as you start to make multiples of that one big balloon that you started with, becomes increasingly more difficult. And just again, it has that pick up and play, but almost as soon as you die or get a game over, you want to try again. And this particular version, whilst I don't particularly like the art style, I would have preferred them to stay with something more pixel based. It has a great 2-player mode, a great co-op mode, and it has a story mode, so it's well worth playing. Really, really good game.
Yeah, Pang Adventures took up many hours of our time, didn't it, when we were playing in co-op? Brilliant game. Next up then is one that I've purchased literally last week, or this week I should say, in the sale, and it's called Railgrade, and I never even heard of it. You probably hadn't heard of this one either. So it's essentially a top-down strategy game that looks very similar to a recent strategy that we reviewed on the channel that we said was very addictive, that Factorio game. This time around you're set on a colony, you've got a task, a very specific mission. It might be transporting certain supplies to a different area of this locale, and you have to lay down your tracks, you have to calculate your resources, and then try and just essentially deliver things where they need to go. Now, on the face of it, it might sound quite dull, but it's incredibly addictive. It's one of those games where it feeds you the mechanics quite quickly, and for a strategy game, usually, let's be honest, on consoles, controls are the defining factor to enjoyment, and the controls for this one are so easy to use. Things like hovering over the the building that you need to supply resources to, and rather than having to press any buttons at all, it will just fade in a menu and show you exactly what's required. It just means that everything's easy and accessible, which for me personally does make a huge difference. I know for Factorio, that was probably one of our biggest critiques, was that the controls just weren't quite as good as they could be. Now overall, it's on sale at the moment if you catch this week, but it's very long. There are hundreds of levels to work your way through. I think it's really good value for money, and yeah, just something maybe a little bit different.
Lovely. I hadn't even heard of that one. Yeah, sounds good. Right, my next one is Cadence of Hyrule. I think its full name is Crypt of the Necrodancer, Cadence of Hyrule, or the other way around. But it's basically a rhythm game from that series, Crypt of the Necrodancer, but with a Legend of Zelda skin. Now, when I first played this, we've got a review for this on the channel actually, we'll put a link to that down in the description. But when I first played it, I wasn't quite sure what to expect or whether I'd enjoy it. I'm a big Zelda fan, especially the older games, and it definitely has that look to it. But obviously that rhythm aspect was kind of I was in two minds as to whether to pick it up or not, but having played it, it really does have an incredibly addictive nature to it. It is a roguelite by nature, but you don't ever feel that you lose too much progress if you die. It's more about the procedural generation of the tiles. It has a set amount of tiles when you leave one screen, and it will put one of those tiles as your next destination every time you leave and enter the new screen. But there's a moment for me, or there was a moment when it just clicks. You know, like you're playing the game and you're trying to get the beats of the rhythm, and you're missing a few beats, and you're not quite sure if you quite getting the hang of it. And then there's always a moment when it just works, and you just get the beat right, and you slash your sword at the right moment and kill an enemy, and it feels amazing. And as soon as you have that moment, you're in. I would recommend this one. You know, if you're a Zelda fan, I'm sure your interest will be piqued anyway, but you do have to have some sort of like or interest in rhythm games, but it's not solely about that. It's a very interesting hybrid that works quite well.
Yeah, it also helps if you've got some rhythm, right? Yeah. Next up then, we've got Subnautica. Now this is a good example of where I find something addictive that potentially Glen wouldn't. And for me, I really do like survival games. Anything that means that I have to go out almost on runs to get the materials to survive, head back, make a slight upgrade to my base area, and then head out again. And that continual pushing further, or pushing in this case, deeper into the ocean, I find that incredibly compelling. Now this one is, there's something about the vast open seas which is quite terrifying. So although this doesn't present itself as a horror or a scary game, when you've built yourself a submarine and you head into a new depth in the ocean, and that's almost how your level, your progression is judged, I guess, by the depth that you can dive. When you're heading down there and you start to see the glass will begin to crack and things like that, it's absolutely terrifying. Now it's all set on an alien planet, you've crash landed, and it does have a narrative in there as well, although it's not overly overt, and you don't really feel like you have to chase the narrative. It's simply building up that base area, which is a pod that you've crashed in, and you can build structures and things like that. I just find that loop so Moorish. I think that's me in general for survival games. This list could be filled with just survival for me personally, and this is a great example. And I believe, again, if you're buying it this week, which is March, around the March the 1st, end of February, it is on sale for a few weeks, so it's worth considering.
Yeah, and as much as that previous game epitomises what Mark likes about, or finds addictive I should say, this next one really does do the same for me, and it's a very different sort of game. It's Missile Command Recharged. Now Missile Command is a game that's been around for a long time. I think it came out in arcades 1980, I think. It was very early 80s if not, but I didn't actually play it. I had an Atari 2600, I played a lot of the classic games, Asteroids, Centipede, those sort of games on there, but this was one that I didn't, and I didn't actually play it until I bought myself a version of it that was a 2-in-1 pack for the Game Boy with Asteroids, and it was the first time I'd ever played it, and it's a fantastic game. And the basic premise is that you have a city that you need to defend from incoming missiles, and the way you do that is by using your own defense system to shoot off and destroy them before they reach you, and you use like a crosshair on the screen to try and obviously take those out, and you need to judge your blast radius to make sure that you don't overshoot and obviously miss the missile and therefore have your city destroyed. Now the original arcade used a trackball, and obviously any version that you play after that is either using a D-pad or a control stick, and it can be awkward to play it with that. But this new version, this recharged version, controls pretty well to be fair, and it also has an interesting upgrade system where you can use the points you get on each run as well as getting a high score, which goes to an online leaderboard as well. You can use the points you get to upgrade either the strength of your missiles, how quickly your defense systems can recharge or come back to life, if you like, if you get destroyed, just things like that. And it does really give an old game a nice new edge. And as well as that, you can play it in touchscreen on the Switch, and that is almost revolutionary. It's great to play it that way. It just breathes, you know, brings a fresh aspect to an old game, and it's well worth playing if you like the original.
Lovely stuff. Yeah, that's a good point actually. A lot of these games, they're almost more addictive when you're playing in handheld. Next up then, I've got Bear and Breakfast, and this is definitely one I mentioned, I think even in the last one of this video, but thankfully it's received a few patches. Now I wanted to bring this up because for that very reason really, not only have they included a bit of free content, so there's some Christmas bits and bobs if you fancy having a bit of a late festive season, but they've fixed a lot of the issues in terms of performance as well as crashes. So if you kind of avoided this one for those reasons, now's the time to go back. You essentially play as a friendly looking bear, a bit like Yogi in a way. And you've got to run a bear and breakfast. A bear and breakfast, you've got to run a bed and breakfast, which is a bit of an unusual premise, but it works really well. You and your mates essentially leave the, what do the bears live in? A burrow? Live in a burrow or a cave? Yeah, they live in a cave or something like that. They leave anyway. They're like, see you later, mum, because their mama bear's there doing the house up, as she does. And they go walking down the street and they find this little old abandoned shack and they think, yeah, I know what would be a good idea, let's do this up. So they start to do it up. Now, in terms of controls and things like that, it's very much like the old, what are they called? 2 Point Hospital. Yeah, really similar to that in terms of dragging out the size of the rooms and placing items. Unfortunately, they did make a few weird choices with the controls, and that's probably the biggest hurdle, the biggest barrier to entry, is that they're just a bit fiddly. And it's always annoying, isn't it, when you've got fiddly controls in a brilliant game, because it kind of throws you off, doesn't it?
Yes, it is a shame. It's almost make or break, isn't it, with some games, whether they get the controls right or not. So is that new patch that you've mentioned anything control based?
No, so that's what I was looking at. I was really hoping that they would have tweaked them, and I did message the developers. I was like, hey look, the biggest issue is the controls, but they've obviously decided that that's the way they wanted to do it, which is fair enough, you know, that's kind of their prerogative. But it doesn't change the fact that if you can get past them and learn them, it's a brilliant game, very addictive. You gradually unlock larger and larger establishments, add in your own stuff in, add in your own flair, booking guests in, and what's very good is they've put a concierge in, so you don't have to be everywhere at one time, which does get an issue about halfway through the game. Brilliant, well recommended, and yeah, consider Bear and Breakfast.
Lovely. Right, my final game then is Risk of Rain. Now, there had to be a roguelite, you know, a pure action roguelite on here of some description, because they are just so addictive when they get their mechanics right. And this for me is one of the best. Now, the way this works, again, similar to my first game, Butcher, in terms of the aesthetic, you know, a very small sprite, very, very basic pixel art style, and you basically have to make your way around a level, taking out all of the enemies, but you need to find the portal to take you to the next stage. And once you activate that portal, then you are kind of locked in for 90 seconds. You know, a whole host of enemies attack you and you need to survive. And then once the portal is activated, you need to take out any remaining enemies on that stage before you can leave. What makes it, obviously, that, you know, that would be quite boring if that were all it was, but of course it has that classic roguelite structure of having to find power-ups, and there are you know, a huge amount of chests, and you get money for every enemy you kill, which you then use to purchase these upgrades, and you never really know what they do until you buy them, and they can make you ridiculously strong, or they can hamper you sometimes. And it's that feeling of being so powerful that you almost feel invincible, and then the game just destroying you within a second. And I love that about roguelites. That's what I really enjoy. I don't mind starting again when that happens, because you've had such a good time getting there. Now, this does have a sequel which basically takes the exact same principle and makes it a 3D game, puts you into a 3D world, a third-person 3D environment. And some people would tell you that that's the better game, and I wouldn't necessarily disagree. The reason I've gone for the first one, two reasons really. The first one is I've only played an hour maybe of the second game as opposed to countless hours of the first, but also the performance on the Switch from that 1 hour I've played isn't great. So still a fantastic game, but for me personally, I'd go with the first one.
Brilliant, amazing game. All right, the last one then is one that released recently, and I wasn't sure of the premise. It's 2 Point Campus. Now, if you played 2 Point Hospital, Theme Hospital, any of those, they follow exactly the same formula. Essentially, you have to cater for a load of people that want a load of stuff. In Campus, I wasn't sure how that was going to work, because obviously in hospital you have to deal with illnesses. Here it's things like creating a faculty or creating an area where they can chill out and building the different classrooms and stuff like that. It works really well. It's exactly the same as Campus really, in terms of that basic gameplay, but it's very fun. And I guess that's the compelling nature for me. It's going back. I do really like in these games just free play modes. I know you can obviously play campaign and gradually work from campus to campus, improving it. I'm one of those people that will carry on after you've met all the criteria and just try and build this place up to the very best that it can be, and just enjoying the gameplay rather than feeling like I have to move on to the next area. 2 Point Campus does it brilliantly, and I would highly recommend it. And that's all I've got to say about that one.
Yeah, I'd throw another one in there as well. I'd say that 2 Point Hospital and Campus are very similar to Theme Hospital in terms of the kind of isometric view. If you want something that's more similar to Theme Park with that top-down view, Let's Build a Zoo is a great alternative. Just another little bonus one there.
Awesome. All right, apologies for that one, because that's going to probably add to someone's backlog. Hopefully there's something in there maybe that you've never even considered.
Yeah, as always, please do put your addictive games in the comment section below. As we said at the start, really, you know, the term is quite broad, isn't it?
Yeah.
You know, people find things addictive for different reasons, so stick down why as well. That'll be fun to read, and it might just give other people an idea of, you know, what they might want to pick up.
Awesome. As we said at the start, do save yourself 5% on your eShop credit using code SwitchUp over at switchup.gg. And all that's left to say is thanks to our Patreons and our members, and for all things Switch all the time, keep it Switch up. Cheers guys. See ya.